Good day to you. This is Anagalactic on a Friday, July 25th, 2025 from Chico, California. Over here you'll see a title that I've adapted from a rather currently famous extrapolation into a unified approach, unfortunately using linear mathematics, which simply cannot work as I've proved. The term geometric unity has really risen, either like cream or the other stuff that rises, according to the Russian proverb that I love. Not only cream floats, there's something else that floats that's not nearly as palatable as cream. And geometric unity is, in a word, a deception. Now, I don't like to start out on a negative note, but Eric Weinstein, whose name I no longer need to avoid because everyone knows it. Certainly Kurt Jai Mungle and Sabina Hassenfelder know about Eric Weinstein. Joe Rogan. Lex Friedman is the man who introduced Eric Weinstein to the popular science circuit. But I am an expert in counter-espionage. So I've learned that when there's a pile of horse poop, you need to look around for the pony. And this is called reading between the lines. If you've seen the very, very good movie Russia House, you know that the nature of counter-espionage is to get the enemy to tip his hand. The enemy knows that his time is short now. This would be pseudoscience, of course, as you know, which is dominant now from the European, American, Israeli side of the axis of evil. Depends on your point of view from a political aspect, which side is the axis of evil. Well, it would be the aggressor, probably. Not always, but in this case, certainly, Iran has just been attacked by NATO. And NATO is synonymous with Israel, the United States, and Europe. So they're the aggressors, and they're attempting to shut down the legitimate operations in Iran to produce whatever the fuck they want. And if you deny the country the right to do that, that country has the right to go to war. They haven't done so yet, but Israel says they've already begun 70 or a million years ago, and that the Islam people are determined to exterminate the Jews. That is called a lie. And in politics, lies are extremely important. In science, the same thing happens. You get concerted deception. Whose mind is responsible for that? It depends entirely on your immersion into the transcendental realm, which we don't do in science, do we? Better at least know about it, or you're never going to understand world events. We just entered the apocalypse. But on a lighter note, geometric unity is a perfect. I really admire Eric Weinstein and his brother Brett. He's a stockbroker, really a hedge fund operator. It's a form of usury, which is forbidden under Judaic law, which no longer applies. So in the United States, Eric Weinstein is perfectly free to be a predator and a parasite, which is what he is, by profession. But he also apparently has a lot of free time, and he's gone well into linear mathematics in order to come up with a pure chimera called geometric unity. Now, he's perfectly entitled to do that. I don't deny Eric's rights at all. If he wants to go up through the Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan circuit to rise to the top like cream, that is perfectly within his inassailable American rights. Well, I also have the same rights that Eric does, so I'm going to point out that geometric unity is exactly the right term. And I'm really proud of Eric that he and his network have come up with this term to foist on the world public scene in science, so-called geometric unity. What would that imply? Well, nothing in his 60-page paper, which was dissected by Dr. Dave and by Kurchai Mongol. I strongly recommend that you at least, for as long as you can stand it, listen to Kurchai Mongol's 3-hour dissection of the paper that Eric Weinstein, who is a spy, I don't think I'm speaking out of class. Everyone, I've read hundreds of comments. I've followed Eric for years. I saw him when he first appeared. I also know where Joe Rogan comes from. He comes right through the David Letterman show. That's how he got his fame. Joe Rogan is actually a UFC wrestler, as you probably know. He knows nothing about science and admits it. But he's a very curious man. I really like Joe. Well, for that matter, I really like Lex. But they're all part of a cartel. And it's just a matter of speculation. Well, not in my industry. I can't afford to speculate. I actually have to figure it out. But I don't expect you to believe me. I'm not on a platform for anything except truth. So geometric unity is a term that I should have thought of because it's perfect. But what does it mean? Well, it means you're using something much more powerful than mathematics. So where is the geometry in his paper? It's non-existent. That's correct. And it's just a fascinating study, which, again, unless you're really interested in counter-espionage, which I had to master, it's part of my other life way back when in Ukraine. I lived in Ukraine illegally for a long time, and I was also a teacher there, and I was also a pastor there. I divulged the name of God as it was delivered through the Israeli tribes before they were destroyed and cursed according to the Mosaic covenant. But wow, they're back on the map. How did that happen? You don't need to know if you don't want to, because it's one of the most destabilizing apperceptions that you'll ever encounter. It goes way beyond conspiracy theory. And it began at Yalta, where I first kissed the Princess of Ukraine, whom all the most beautiful girls in the world are from Ukraine. That's been known for centuries. On old maps, Ukraine was marked as female slaves. There's a resource, which is still there. You can still find Ukrainian girls who are so destitute and impoverished that they're willing to do anything to survive. And of course, there are predators in the West who are perfectly willing to take a female slave if you have enough money. What they want on that side, which is basically the communist side, it never went away. It's in Israel right now. It's also in Russia and Ukraine. By the way, the president of Ukraine is a Russian Jew. So is Lex Friedman. So is Eric Weinstein. Joe Rogan is not. Joe Rogan is from New York, which is why he got on the David Letterman show and rose meteorically to become the greatest talk show host of all time, way beyond David Letterman, although they cater to two slightly different audiences. So all of this is my bracketing information, which I've learned I need to get off my chest right away so we can get right into science. So what is geometric unity? Well, in the mouth of Eric Weinstein, it means nothing. Literally, nothing. There's no unity anywhere in his paper. There's no geometry. So what would it be if it were a real thing? Is it a real thing? What is geometry? What would be unity? That's quite an abstract term, although it's part of sacred geometry, so-called. I've read 2 books on sacred geometry. Utterly fascinating. But alas, most of sacred geometry inherited what we knew from the Greeks for 2,000 years now and more. And the line simply does not work. A moment's thought should convince you of that, and here's how you can actually tune in, turn on, and drop out, I suppose, by that a piece of LSD right there. Oh my God! That's not blasphemous, it's ejaculatory, which has a sexual connotation. Oh yeah, we're going all the way, baby. So I hope you're having fun. I certainly am. I've calmed down. In 2025, I face some unbelievable hurdles, both monetary and psychological. The psychological aspect being far more important in my personal view, although I did have to take care of finances too. I'm living on rice and beans for the next 10 days. It's no problem. I know how to be in wealth, and I know how to be in poverty, as the great evangelist Paulos, formerly named Saul, the apostle of Jesus Christ the risen, blessed be his name and peace be upon him. Jesus Christ, which is a mispronunciation of his beautiful name, Yeshua HaMashiach, is the only man in Islam, and not all of my Islam brothers might agree with this, but they would tolerate me saying my personal opinion because it's not in any way contradictory to revealed religion. But as you know, the Islam people like to say, when they mention their prophet, and also Abraham, and there's a list after whose name, which I say you should at least do this the first time you say one of those names, you should say peace be upon him to show respect. And you would say that of Yeshua. That's what they say, peace be upon him, because they consider him to be a prophet like any other prophet. I happen to have much greater insight than, I'll just say, the standard baseline Islam point of view allows, because they don't allow a man to have they don't allow a man to equate himself with God. Well, Yeshua never did that. And that's, of course, part of an entire propaganda scheme, really foisted first by the Roman Catholic Church, which poisoned Europe, let's face it. And the Protestants merely inherited what the Catholics had already gotten from, I'll just say, an ulterior source. I can't imagine where that originated. Who would be against Christianity or Islam? Well, I'm not going to say, but I'm sure you can guess, because there's only one other candidate. The ones who murdered the chief prophet. And Yeshua is not like the other prophets, although he is. It's superpositional. Where all the other prophets, the Ishmaeli prophets, there's only one Ishmaeli prophet that I think they recognize, unless you include Abraham and all of his descendants, which I believe is how they do it. In fact, I know it is. So they do consider Muhammad to be a prophet. He certainly is. But there's different levels of prophet. Now, in the case of Yeshua, he was prophesied from before the Chicxulub impactor, which is what a standard term for that would be the flood, which is considered universally throughout Christendom and European American Israeli society. That is considered to be a disgusting, superstitious myth that anybody who believes in the flood, which is in Wikipedia, is an idiot. So this goes quite deep, quite quickly, but I want you to know the level that we're at. We're going to get into science today to a level that I'm sure you are greatly looking forward to, but you can't find it. Nobody seems to know what to do to penetrate the veil, for instance, of universal cosmology, which is kind of redundant, and the quantum paradox, which is at the other end of the scalar spectrum. Or it goes from macro scale all the way out to the edge, down to the infinitesimal, which is the other edge, as I will show you. I'm sure that makes intuitive sense, but where's the beef? We need the proofs. We need the mathematics. Mathematics is a tool for geometry, and that's the correct hierarchy. So geometric unity is an excellent term, whichever side of the espionage fence you're on. And if you're trying to brainwash an entire civilization, society, culture, or country such as the United States, where everything works, because the American public is so incredibly retarded. Our educational system is a sham. and you learn reading, writing, arithmetic. That's perfectly fine. But then you get natural selection, Darwinian biological evolution, and no information about Islam except they're demonic. They need to be destroyed. We're sending Israel to get them, and we'll come in with our Marines and stealth bombers, which is exactly what's happening. And it just started this month, although it's been going on for decades. The extermination of the brown people, who are just happen to be Islam, and the Europeans who still call themselves Jews, which is already a lie, and that's in the Apocalypse. The Jews who are not Jews, they say they're Jews, but they're a synagogue of Satan. So that's the enemy of God, according to the ancient religion. Is he a jinn? Is he a spirit? Yes. Is he an angel? Is he one of the engineers? Yes. He defected. That's in Revelation, the Apocalypse. That's what I'll be discussing in future presentations so that you'll know what's about to happen to you and to everybody. The Apocalypse respects no person, no nation, no religion. Neither does Islam, although Islam is quite gracious and tolerant of all religions. They're not persecutory people. They're not dogmatic people. They're good people. And there are a billion of them, so you would have to say that statistically there is a consensus that Islam is good. That's why I'm Islam. It is good. It's the highest religion. It's the oldest religion. So, what does that have to do with science? Deception. Across the board. Right through science, which is European. Real science is universal. That's what I deal with. I don't deal with American or European technology because it's satanically controlled. If you don't like the word Satan, I understand why you don't. You were traumatized in your youth by your motherfucking religion, so-called, and now you hate God and hate religion. That's the whole idea. You're a controlled idiot, and that's all you'll ever be until you wake up. So nothing matters unless you do that, so I deal with that because I'm the highest form of scientist, someone who goes after the truth. The truth that the universe tells us that can be proved by rational propositional logic, including geometry and mathematics. And that is the correct hierarchy, so it's not mathematical unity. What Eric would have called his document, 60 pages of really bullshit, would have been mathematical fragmentation or mathematical fractalization carried to its logical extreme to confuse the shit out of you so you'll never wake up. Your rational mind will never turn on. You'll just be dumbfounded listening to maniacs, of whom Eric Weinstein is simply the most polished. He's basically a spy. And he's very, very good at it. Just to listen, for instance, and I won't name names here, but it's a list of thousands of names. I'll just say either Brian Greene or Sean Carroll or Michio Kaku. There's hundreds of these you can find in just one day, but there's actually on the order of 10 to 100,000 of these monsters, all of whom are atheists, all of whom tell you that you're descended from monkeys, and who say that the universe is expanding. The actual goal of all of this malarkey is to make you so confused that you're hypnotized. And it's actually dangerous to listen to these men for very long because, whether consciously or unconsciously, they're trained to destroy you. That's what they're doing. They're attempting to destroy your mind. They're very good at it. I'm untouchable. I'm beyond their reach, and therefore it's required of me, however risky it might seem to you or me, I have to denounce them. That's Islam. Because they're dangerous. They're mortally dangerous. They're the enemy itself. Now, most of them don't know it, but Lex Friedman certainly does. Joe Rogan is probably too stupid to know how he's being used. He simply wants fame. That's perfectly reasonable in America. It's not perfectly reasonable in Islam. You are not after something for yourself if you're promulgating the truth. You're exposing what the universe says that you can prove so that someone else can understand it too. That alone is science. At the highest level. I only deal at the highest level. So we'll get into apocalypsis, the pulling aside of the veil, which is the pulling aside of the veil of heaven. When all of the UFOs will appear at once, all the angels will manifest, there's going to be a fight to the death at 2 levels, and the earth will be completely destroyed by fire. Whether that's thermonuclear bombs or step bombs, which are 3rd stage thermonuclear bombs, or if it's just fire from heaven, nobody knows. Well, I shouldn't say nobody knows. I'm not sure who might know, but I don't know. And if I don't know, it doesn't matter. So that's your pretentious, precocious, pompous, megalomaniac. Oh no, I'm the most stable man you'll ever meet. But I do have a duty. That's why I went to Ukraine, in my day, I went to Ukraine 5 times in order to spread the gospel. Although it's not the gospel of the Protestants. I was never really a Seventh-day Adventist. Although I was talked into getting baptized in their church, and my eyes were beet red. The pastor, who also married me to my first wife, which was a good marriage for 10 years. The last 2 weeks were a little rough, but that's the way it goes in America. I was young, but he married us in a very great ceremony where everybody in the room, with the exception possibly of my parents, were higher than kites on cocaine. But when I got baptized by the same man in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, my eyes were cherry red from marijuana overdose. And then he immersed me, and then he talked with me about it later. What were you high on? I said, marijuana, it's in the Bible. And later on, I wasn't so much excommunicated as I just disappeared off their radar, and I'll never go into a Protestant church ever again in my life. Although I would go into a mosque to pray. They're holy people. The Islam people are, of course, the chosen people of God, to replace the miserable remnants of the Israelis who betrayed their own Lord and murdered his son. So to get back to Yeshua, he is not an ordinary prophet, and believe me, I totally sympathize with Islam, because they learned of Yeshua through the goddamned Catholics. And of course they had a misconception of Yeshua according to the ridiculous dogma of the Satanic Catholic Church, who don't worship Yeshua, they just fake it. They're perfect deception artists. So the Islam culture, which arose about the 7th century and has continued to this day as the dominant religion of earth, obviously blessed by God, they have a magnificently beautiful culture, in total contradistinction to the cesspool of America, which is basically just a sprawling citadel of idiots. And don't blame yourself and don't blame anybody, because there's nothing to blame. You simply have to recognize what's happened. So who is Yeshua really? I'm speaking to the Islam people primarily, although I don't know how many Islam people are tuned into my station at this time. There's significantly few people at all. But it is a message to Islam primarily that Yeshua is not like any other prophet. He was a prophet. He admitted that. But when asked if he were God himself, he said no. And that's in the New Testament. And it is perfectly consistent. Here's the keynote verse if you do read the Bible or you would like to understand it from a qualified guide. I will give this to you because that's my job. I just hope that you don't try to kill me for telling you the truth. But when Yeshua was asked a question, the man began by saying, "Good master," and Jesus interrupted him. Yeshua. I will alternate between Jesus and Yeshua. It's all right. It's not a sin to mispronounce his name. Because it's not being mispronounced, you're in another language group, maybe you can't say, I can't say it right. Well, then you say, Jesus. Pardon the snuff, I can't smoke. Because I have asthma. And I shouldn't be doing mouth tobacco. I'm a hypocrite, a hypocrite. Well, so are you. So, so don't point the finger. I'm allowed to do this to myself if I want, although there is an injunction against destroying your own body. He who destroys his own body will be destroyed by God. So I'm taking a chance. Well, I'm on pretty good terms with deity by now, I would suspect, and I believe that he's all merciful. Blessed be his name. Can you say of Yeshua, blessed be his name? You could. But it depends on how you construe what you're saying. Because if you say, blessed be his name, you might be equating him with deity. Well, that's actually not out of the question either. And there is ample proof from the gospel records, such as we have acquired from John, Mark, Luke, and Matthew, at least, that Yeshua was divine in a unique way. He was prophesied even before the flood. Hanok talks about Yeshua, and it's clear that Enoch, as we know him in America, was fully acquainted with the prophetic record which was given to Adam and to Noah and then to Enoch, and then it was carried on essentially by the Abrahamic lineage, which was chosen by God because Abraham was an astronomer. That doesn't mean that all astronomers are blessed by God, although I would say that statistically that's true. It's the fact that as an astronomer, while he was looking at the starry night sky and talking with his creator, he named him correctly. And the Lord does have a soul, although it's illimitable, and he has feelings. We would not have feelings if the Creator did not have feelings, because we get everything we are from the Creator, except for a certain intrusive, the Nachash in Eden, that was Satan controlling an animal to deceive Eve, who then deceived Adam, and they both were under a curse for that, which is endured to this day. But don't worry about the fine details. The important aspect is you need to recognize your Creator by name. That's what the whole thing is about in saying, blessed be his name. When you identify the ineffable Creator, you're attempting to name someone who really is unnameable in any human language, but he did reveal his name. And he says that his name is invested in just one prophet. Just one. That's Yeshua, the Word of God. None of the other prophets have the title Logos. So Yeshua is entitled to very close to supreme adoration. He's the direct representative of God. Now, he's not here right now, so you can't take his place in the Vatican by putting on a white robe and a gold crown and standing in Rome talking to the millions of impoverished dupes and telling them that he is the vicar of Christ on earth. The Islam people don't allow that, and they invaded Europe in order to correct those assholes, but they were driven back. So Europe has remained in darkness ever since, and Luther's Reformation did nothing to change the dire situation of so-called Christianity. So to sum up the message, and then we'll get right into the science, Yeshua is not exactly divine by Islamic standards. And you must not offend those people, because they do know what true religion is. They do respect Yeshua as a prophet like all other prophets. That's good enough. But to say he's God, very God, is blasphemy. He never said that. Nobody ever said that about Yeshua. Although in the Israeli prophet series, going to Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they did talk about the fact that the Son of God is actually the Son of God. Now, the Islam people have, I'll just say, developed a certain aspect on that because that's the divine birth. Yeshua was only half human. So you can see that you're free to make your decision either way, whether he was divine or not. But you have to be cautious, certainly around Islam people, and I am Islam. It's just that I came from a different direction to get to Islam so that I would realize that I am on the way. I've always known that I was on the way of heaven because I became a Christian by divine intervention. Like Paul, I was knocked off of my horse and converted by force because heaven can enlist whomever they want, whenever they want. But there does have to be good ground. That's in a lot of Yeshua's parables, that when the word of God goes to a man and reaches him directly, it's not by force, because it's based on love. You can't force love. I needed no forcing. Heaven already knew that. I was good ground. I knew nothing of God, Jesus, or the Bible when I was 17, and I was visited just as Abraham looking at the stars. I, like Abraham, was looking at the stars and thinking about Jesus, the Bible, and God, about whom I knew nothing, except what I had heard from some Christadelphian ministers, a very interesting sect, but I don't affiliate with any sect because they're all insane. The ancient religion is not insane. Only Western scientists, I'll just say as a leader group, consider the Bible to be superstition. That's because they're fully deceived, and that's why I warn you against men like Lex Friedman and Eric Weinstein. And if you want to see the worst of the worst, Larry Krauss, who is also, a pseudo JEW, who still thinks that he's somehow a JEW, as they all apparently do because of their DNA lineage, which has nothing to do with anything. So he is so violently atheist that he actually makes a mockery of himself. He's so far gone that he doesn't realize how he's being used, and so he's like the church idiot. And so when you listen to Larry Krauss, you have to select the right video, although he does it in virtually every video. These men are trained to deny God. That's the whole reason for cutting-edge science now, is to promote this cadre or cartel of insane people who are so well educated in mathematics that they think that they're above God. Well, the Islam people don't allow that. They won't kill you, but they will definitely warn you until, depending on your threat to them or those that they love, and they love all people, they will bring you down. Now, I cannot do that because I'm a diplomat of a higher order. I was ordained by heaven itself to expose the ancient religion, which I've done all my life. So I do know who Yeshua is. Do the Islam people know who Yeshua is? Sufficiently, yes. But there's an inner teaching and a overt or outer teaching, as it's called. I'm basically, in Islam, I would be called a Sufi. I'm not a whirling dervish. Those men are unbelievable. They can just spin all day. By the way, that shows centrifugal force as their skirt, or whatever you call it. As they spin, it rises. Newton did this experiment and was amazed. Mach has a whole theory about centrifugal force, which Alexander Unziker of Deutschland has fully exposed in his book, Einstein's Lost Key, which I've read twice. So I really admire this man, but I always pity the real struggling scientists such as Dr. Unsicker, who can see that linear mathematics leads nowhere, but he doesn't know the solution. I do. So that's what we're going to get into today. Thank you for tuning in. That's our first half hour. I have to do this because we just entered the apocalypse. So you're going to get religion right along with science. I hope you enjoy it. I always try to be truthful. I try to make what I say palatable. I'm not here to bring down any pillars. I'm a diplomat. I'm an international diplomat of the United States of America. And I take my calling very seriously. I've been inordinately successful, considering I'm a nobody. I will no longer tolerate being treated as a nobody because the time is short and I'm 70 years old. Within 4 months of my 71st birthday. And I am dying, well, we all are, but I'm dying of campfire smoke inhalation, which is why sometimes I have to put this on pause in order to get medication and to cough and hack and vomit. So I won't be here much longer. So I do take my duty seriously. I'm altruistic. I don't ask for anything. The only reason I will be asking for $10,000, actually $1,000 to $10,000, after a while on my lecture tour, which I envision, it's only to get interest. Because Americans don't believe anything that they don't pay for. If it's free, it's bullshit. That's how far gone we are. What I have, I give freely, but you're going to have to pay just because of the statistical resistance to truth. You're not going to believe the truth unless you pay. So I will charge for my lectures. You're getting it for free now. You're getting it right out the gate because all of this was discovered within the past 3 years. We're now going to go into hypergeometry. We'll be right back. This will be on pause as I go tend to my needs. Stay tuned. Okay, we're back, and I apologize for that interruption. Over here you'll see the fading moon. We're going to switch to something non-lunar here in order to continue with our investigation of cutting-edge science, where we're trying to learn directly from the universe without human intervention. Now, of course, there's a footnote to that. I'm a human intervener. Well, you have to trust your guide. That's why I gave you that warning in the first half hour of this presentation. And now we turn to science itself. Here you'll see, and you may not be able to read this, I'm simply going to read it, but show you that it is part of a monograph that I'm developing right now in order to approach this incredible quantum paradox from yet another direction. This is required because it's an induction sequence where you have to have a lot of perspectives on the paradox in order to make the breakthrough insight, which will then bring you out like as from a funnel. You're trying to focus, focus, focus. In order to do that, you have to have perspective. You do that by stepping back to see a bigger picture while still maintaining focus. And that gives you a wider range, but it reduces the scope of what you're looking at, really in order to get context. And then once you make the breakthrough, the funnel opens up, and that actually can be overwhelming. Krishnamurti and David Bohm found it so. I did too. I expect that you will too. But it's better than any ride at Disneyland or the boardwalk. It's better than any LSD trip because it'll stay with you. It won't just be airy-fairy, I saw my pants turn into a great collage. It's direct insight from the universe to you to change you. That's the mysterious aspect of science, is that it is part and parcel of religion. Now here, I'll just read the title. It's Zwicky-Bock's Quantum Reflection. Fritz Zwicky, the greatest astrophysicist of the 20th century, you don't have to worry about my subjective opinion. I'm just giving you the bracketing information. He's one of my teachers. I got his book Morphological Astronomy and read it twice and covered the book's pages with notes and took extensive notes that filled an entire binder, because Zwicky, as I say, is the greatest astrophysicist of the 20th century. But he went well beyond astronomy. He developed and really invented the science of morphology. And that's a word that you're probably unacquainted with, at least to the extent that I have been exposed to it. But it's a method of problem solving in an inductive situation. He had several patents, and he was instrumental in developing the turbojet engine at a time when it had not yet been invented. And the way he explains how he went about solving the problem of aerojet propulsion, or really aeroflight propulsion, the turbojet engine was the perfect solution. It's not rocketry. It uses air and funnels it and heats it and ejects it from the aft of the turbojet to create forward momentum. And he was instrumental in the development of that amazing breakthrough in technology. So he's no patsy. He's not just some guy looking through binoculars at the stars. He discovered the third cosmic unit. I won't go into that now, but it's what's today called galaxy clusters, which are the building blocks of the universe in a certain sense. So Zwicky box is a grid. It's a multi-dimensional grid where you express all the variables in what you're trying to resolve so that you can get really a database approach to how to solve it. Because you don't know where to begin. You see, that's the whole problem, is you're looking for something in the cloud. Well, he found the way to explore the cloud that is quite decisive. If it's done correctly, it will give you the answer, although you have to remember there may not be an answer. You may have formulated a question that does not actually have an answer in the context you desire. But you can find that out too, which is a necessary part of science. Sometimes you reach a dead end and have to back out or get out and do something else. Well, the Zwicky box is a organized method of doing that, and I am responsive to this approach because I'm by profession a database manager. I'm a systems manager and database programmer. That's how I made my living. Now, the word quantum is simply inserted to show the scale. So the Zwicky box is being applied to the quantum paradox, which is very tiny scale, of course. Now, reflection is a term from programming, and it refers to introspection, where you're analyzing your system itself to see how it's working. And that's called reflection in a certain context. So this is an attempt to outline a certain approach to the quantum paradox based on the morphological method of Fritz Zwicky. In the second line down, it says, morphologic reassessment of the quantum fractal. Fractal could be replaced with a fragmentation or fragmentary aspect of the whole paradox, is that everybody's ranged around this burning fire with no way to figure out how it started. And so we have all kinds of rather harebrained theories, although each one of the theoretical approaches has a merit. But it's always incomplete, and this just frustrated the bejeepers out of Einstein, who simply terminated his life with his statement, which he never backed away from. No matter what Bohr said, Einstein withstood him to his face and said, your system is incomplete, and that is not acceptable. Bohr said, too bad. So he's just a whiner in the face of a real scientist who was frustrated because he couldn't defeat Bohr. All right, so the morphologic reassessment of the quantum fractal is my way of saying we're trying to get out of the trap using a well-documented approach which has tangible results. There's no guarantee because you're examining the cloud. In this case, the quantum paradox, which is irresolvable from the linear aspect, but it's not irresolvable from the spheric aspect. That's the whole nature of my discovery in terms of physics. It's very far-reaching, so we're going to try to cover... I'm sorry, a gnat just flew in here, so I don't know. It looks like, you don't want to keep doing this in front of your face. You look like you're kind of out of your mind. Well, most scientists are. You have to be if you're trying to get through the cloud. It is a risk. And some people think, well, if you drift too far from mothership, you'll never come back. I don't know of anybody who's done that, with a possible exception of Cantor, who did die in an insane asylum, and he was dealing with infinities of infinities, so there is a certain, I would say, warning. So on the next line down, it says, solution to the quantum nightmare. I think that's self-explanatory. And then part 1, terminology and disambiguation. I have learned by massive experience that when you're trying to describe and or explain something in physics, when you begin your monograph or paper or whatever you want to call it, you need to do something that very, very few scientists or writers have ever learned how to do, but I've learned it through vast experience in this area, which I simply share with you. Because science, you have to explain things as you go along, so you may get value-added information that you simply didn't know before, and in context it comes up. And in this case, I'm willing to go out to project to you something that may be of very good value to you. I think it should be, but that's just me expressing what I know to you to see if it latches. That's all you can do in communication. So what I do, and I recommend this strongly, when you begin a scientific paper, begin with a glossary. So that when the words come up in context that the reader might not be familiar with, which is more common than not, they'll already have an idea of what it is. All right. And disambiguation, Wikipedia has a marvelous subsystem called the disambiguation page. And if you come to something like, well, just about anything, and there's more than one way of interpreting the term, they'll disambiguate it so you can click on the right link. In certain situations which arise quite frequently, that can be of inestimable service in saving time. It's efficient. So I recommend doing that too. In other words, after the glossary, you also have a number of paragraphs, we'll just say, where you discuss what might be very confusing. So you introduce it so that it won't be a shock in context. Because when you're reading, you want continuity. And if you come to a word that you don't know, you simply stop and wonder. And if you come to some dichotomy that hasn't been resolved and it's just being expressed, well, then you're stymied. You have to halt. You have to stop scansion in order to concentrate on this unknown term or concept. Well, if it's introduced right away so that you're ready for it, that is incredibly helpful. So that's how I do things. So I thought you might like that. So here, in concordance with what I just told you, it was to lead into this. In a prior video this week, I discussed what you see here, which is from the work of János Bolyai, and you can go back if you don't know who that is, or you can look him up. This is a diagram of the evolute of a circle using a translation of the frame of reference, which we call the origin on the graph, and moving it translationally, which is laterally. It's a linear change of position of the center of the circle. So you see at the origin there's no circle, but as you move the center, As soon as you move infinitesimally, there is a circle. First there is no circle, then there is a circle, then there's what? Famous song. So it's moving to infinity. The origin is being moved to linear infinity. What happens at infinity is ostensibly described in the shaded region, and I believe here another diagram which I've covered in a lecture a few months ago called the evolute of a sphere. And you may not be able to see all that. It's not greatly important. I just wanted you to see the diagram, which I will point out the salient features. At the extreme upper corner, in the northwest corner, is the caustic point, which is the detachment of a photon from an electron, which is a spherical propagation called an evolute. And it propagates basically to the southeast. I hope I do this right, yes, down this way. And that is a time sequence showing how a sphere detaches from a spherical surface, which is quite an interesting problem in calculus. All of this is, of course, dealt with linear mathematics, which I have shown conclusively will never get the answer. But in spheric geometry, which is relational instead of sequential, you can see the answer directly, including mathematically, which we're getting to. All right, so much for the evolute of a sphere. And now, as I've shown in previous diagrams, this is starlight. That is the Pleiades star cluster, and it is remarkably beautiful, as all astronomers know. That's light. Now, you can tell that even in a flat image, this is, of course, a photograph, the composite picture is perfectly understandable. How does light do that? Because light has to travel a long ways to get to us. Why is it so consistent? It's because it's information. It's called a signal in upper echelon physical mathematics. It's called a signal, which is something of a conceptual term. It's not a mathematical term. But it is baffling to the human mind, I would say, to the point of awe, that light is so consistent over distance. How is that? I just wanted you to think about that. This is the subject of intensive, I would say, how do you explain what you're seeing there? Well, I've attempted to explain it so that it can be understood in a geometric and mathematics sense, what you're seeing. There is a linear component to that, but what is it? This is no longer at lunar scale, that is solar systemic scale, nor is it even at stellar scale. This is at galactic scale, and what you're seeing is the birth of a galaxy. That's not part of the standard model, so it's completely suppressed information. We won't go into the negative side, but the photograph reveals what your scientists will not reveal because their model disallows truth. That's the danger of letting science run away into a group mind modeling situation. It automatically begins to suppress anything that contradicts the model. The current standard interpretation of what you're seeing is based on a black hole construction, which obviously doesn't make sense here, because the center of this diagram, or I mean photograph, is a quasar, which is a superluminal object, the direct antithesis of a black hole. Are they related? Obviously they are. They're the center of a galactic system. But one is black, and the other one is super luminous. There are no words even in science to describe how bright that thing is. But you'll notice it's also shooting out two jets, which are at subluminal speed, which is a shorthand for saying it's a very large fraction of the speed of light. I'm going to cut to the chase here because I'm using up a lot of time, and we're trying to get to something much more specific than galactic scale. We're trying to get to the force balance of the universe, which is the solution to the quantum paradox. There is an electromagnetic phenomenon going on here. We know it's electromagnetic because these two jets are linear. They're also curving. You can't see it unless you actually consult this photograph. You may be able to see it. The lower lobe, which is in blue, which is the radio band, this was taken with 3 telescopes and then overlaid so you can see the composite. A very valuable, oh man, astronomers love this stuff. I certainly do. I hope you do too. The lower lobe, the southeast lobe, is spinning away. You can see it's darker. That's because it's spinning away. So this is actually rotating this way. And the upper lobe, the counter lobe, is much brighter because it's spinning toward us. That is due to magnetism. The jets are due to electroforce. So you're seeing an electromagnetic explosion of a black hole. I discovered that. So let's move along. This, as you may know from prior video presentations, is the perfect, absolutely perfect visual representation of Maxwellian electromagnetic force relation. It's the relationship between two forces called the magnetic field, which is spatial, and the electrofield, which is not quite spatial. I just wanted you to see that to remind you that is part and parcel of my discovery. Let's go on. And now we've arrived at the nexus. This, of course, is the ultra-famous, or it's getting to be ultra-famous. It's ultra-famous in certain circles in Europe, not so much in the United States, which is lagging behind in cutting-edge science because it's, well, in trouble. But this is not exactly the Boscovich Force Curve, which we need to look at now. That is the Boscovich Force Curve, as he drew it in 1763 for the Vienna edition of his thrice-released ultra-important book, Theoria Philosophiae Naturalis. What are you looking at? That was in the prior video, but I will sum it up here. You're looking at the Bohr atom in a side view, a 2D projection of what is thought to be a 3D phenomenon. And this shows that it is not D at all. It's not linear dimensional at all. But there is a linear aspect. On the horizontal line called the abscissa, it shows spatial separation on a line according to Euclid. That's the relationship between two particles in space. The curved line is superimposed on space which is only on the line. That's a bit hard. You have to think about that for a section, but this is a second. But this is a projection downward from spherical space, or 3D space as it's construed to be. And so the only linear aspect here is on the line. The vertical aspect is non-spatial. It's force. So this is the force relationship between two particles at close proximity. If it's not close proximity, it goes off the graph this way to infinity, showing that whatever the lower side of the non-spatial aspect, that's either repulsive or attractive. Which one it is very difficult to decide because it depends on which two particles are interacting at which range. For the proton, that is a major intuitive block because there are two force ranges for the proton. There's only one force range for the electron, and it's depicted here. Now, Boscovich did not know that this is the relationship between a proton and an electron, but it is. So he did get it right. The proton-proton relationship is not shown there, it's shown here. But this, you can see, although this is vertically, it's out of proportion with respect to this, where the curve is rather smooth, but here the curves are more attenuated vertically. That's because Boscovich had no idea what the metric was. He perceived the geometric relationship. And this is called an algebraic curve, so this can be solved. There's a quantum here, but the quantum is more expressly shown here. You're looking at the curve of quantum infinity, and that's where we're going to begin right now to get the solution to the quantum paradox from the inside out. To best understand this pregnant diagram, which is loaded with profundities, although you'd never guess at first glance, to get into what this actually means, we need to know what it says. And this diagram can be interpreted in two ways, either statically as a map, where it just shows the force relationship at any distance between the two protons. This is the curve of binding energy where two protons lock together to form a nucleus of more than one proton. This can be repeated for up to 100 protons approximately. That's called the periodic table. This is how protons bind. This is not the electrostatic force, and I want to make that very clear right now because this is really a baffling situation. What you're seeing is a segment of a proton-proton relationship that's only showing the inner relationship where they bind, which means they have to overcome the electrostatic repulsive force that is the Coulomb repulsive force between like-charged particles. Two protons at, I'll just say, a nominal distance repel. And this graph does not show that. This is not showing the Coulomb force. If this graph were extended correctly, and I will eventually suggest to Wikipedia that this is an incorrect diagram because the asymptote going off this way looks like it's smooth. That is, it's a complete asymptote to infinity. It is not. So this is incorrect. And I will now reinterpret it for you according to this this diagram, where you see that there's multiple curves. This is the electron-proton relationship, but this is the proton-proton relationship, but there are two ranges of interaction, and this only shows one, and it's extremely misleading. It's incorrect. Because at the right side of the diagram, it shows a smooth asymptote to infinity. That is not true. This is incorrect. It could be defended as just showing a localized range, but if so, it's still wrong. Because what this actually should show is that when this line comes down and reaches the nadir and then rises up again, it's really going in reverse direction, and then tapers this way, it should not taper that way. It should be a different curve which goes above the line and then below the line again. And so this is extremely misleading and shows the state of confusion that physics is in right now at the quantum level. Now, I want you to disregard that for the moment, because this is accurate enough as long as you disregard the right side and just look at the curve as it descends and ascends. And then it is correct. It's locally correct. All right. I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to baffle you, but don't forget, all of your physicists have overlooked what I just said. So, what you're actually seeing now is when two protons Because of relative velocity, that is, you can consider one to have velocity toward the other, that would be necessary to overcome the repulsive force. So the velocity is contrary to the natural repulsive Coulomb force, not depicted here, but over here. The proton approaches, and it is decelerating because of the force, the repulsive force, the electrostatic repulsive force. But the velocity overcomes it, and when it crosses a threshold of proximity, it is now accelerating. And that's what this shows, is acceleration on the right side of the graph. So, the proton, I'll put this proton over here at the origin, and here comes the other proton with velocity. And it's being attracted because it's overcome the electrostatic force, so it's accelerating. And the downward trend of the curve, counterintuitive, is showing acceleration. Think of it as a BB rolling down a hill. That's exactly correct. But don't ever think that the particle, that is the proton, is on the blue line. The particle is always on the space line. So it's linearly, it's linearly going toward the other proton, and it's accelerating. It reaches maximum acceleration at 1 femtometer, which is kind of a coincidence, but it's almost exactly 1 femtometer. That's just a coincidence, but it's quite handy, since now we're dealing with the final range. The two protons are 1 femtometer apart, and the proton is still accelerating at the bottom of the curve. It's accelerating to maximum acceleration, but it's finite. So that occurs at a certain attractive force, which now begins to decrease over a very small space, linear separation. It's still accelerating, but it's slowing down. Its acceleration is decreasing. And then when it reaches the crossing point, where the blue line crosses the space line, there is no force. So now only velocity is involved at that tipping point. And it's an unstable Lagrangian point, which I won't go into now. I have prior videos and I'll have more. But it is a Lagrangian point. So there's no force right there. And that's called it should be called an Eulerian point, but in this case, it would actually be a Lagrangian point, because there are two kinds of Lagrangian points, both of which have no force, but one of which is unstable relative to the other kind. I'm so tempted to tell you more, but I have to go on. We're over an hour already. So if the proton having relative velocity has sufficient relative velocity to get past the tipping point, what happens then is that above the spaceline, it's now repulsive force again. As it had been in the electrostatic relation originally, the proton came in, overcame the repulsive force, and is accelerating, and now reaches sufficient deceleration that there is no force. But with sufficient relative velocity, it will cross the tipping point and encounter what this graph says will be infinite repulsive force, which means that if it continues forward at rather small scale, you'd have to say, if it goes forward, it will be eventually pushed back until it settles right at the crossing point. That is the binding diameter. So I hope that makes sense. That is a crucial insight. This is the intersection of two spherical force fields. And that is the devolute of a sphere. This is the absorption of a proton with another proton so that they don't collide. They bind. They go into mutual orbit on a sphere. It's a spheric relationship between two spheric force fields. So they converge and then they settle. And now you have a helium ion. That is the entire meaning of this diagram. Although it's not yet explained geometrically, that's my discovery because it defines what a quantum is. At the quantum scale itself, without the use of instrumentation, which interferes with the superpositional coordination and thereby invalidates the linear measurement. This is not a linear measurement. This penetrates the quantum. You are looking at the quantum. And that needs to be disambiguated because there are two quantums. You could say quanta, but that's a little bit ambiguous. Quantums. There are two quantums. There's a space quantum. The proton is a space quantum. This graph proves it. They're two spatial particles. What's the electron? It's the anti-space particle. Now, what we need to disambiguate there is the prefix anti, because there are two geometric anti. There's polaric anti, which is charge relationship. You can think of it that way. It's plus minus on a line. But the other relationship that might exist is not polaric plus minus, but it's orthogonal. And you'll see that this is an orthogonality. This asymptote here, which goes off in this direction, is perpendicular to this asymptote. This is the perpendicularity of energy with space, which is an improvement on Einstein's insight. And that is 73 minutes. And that's enough. I'll have another presentation later today where we're going to explore this mathematically and geometrically, so you'll see the proof of my discovery. That solves the quantum paradox. We will discover the quantum of gravity, which is being sought by the physicists. I have that solution completely. We will also discuss what Dirac said, and I agree with Dirac. The one problem that needs to be solved is the collapse of the wave function, and this goes to your cosmic indoctrination into what the universe actually says about reality, all the way to where we cannot follow. That's the goal of science, is to reach that threshold. What happens to you after that depends on factors which we will briefly enough discuss, because access to the truth, don't forget, is also open to the enemy. If you don't understand what I just said, don't worry about it. It's metaphysical. We're getting there. We're going to get the conjugation of consciousness with reality. And then you'll know how your mind intersects with the universe so that you can see reality for the first time. That's the goal of science. But it's transcendental, as David Bohm and Krishnamurti discovered. We'll be right back. Thank you for tuning in. This is Anagalactic, bringing you the core secrets of the universe so that you will attain full transcendental understanding and complete your orbit on the sub-eternal plane. We're finite creatures. Praise be to Allah, who gives us the opportunity to understand His mind the way He wants us to, so we'll be happy and we'll appreciate each other, because each one of us has a unique perspective that's given only to you. You will have to solve your paradox for yourself. Science is here to help you. We'll be right back.